This is the Paris OG podcast, and this is the last episode of the Biotech Series. We've had episode 1, episode 2, where we talked about what it takes to finance a biotech company. We talked about intellectual property and the regulators on episode 1. Well, on this episode, it's like a prequel to everything we've been talking about. It's like we are putting all the pieces together. Here we'll learn about what motivates Dr. James and Dr. Howard to go into oncology drug development and their background in general and the vision of immuno-oncology Dubai. That we will see that it takes an average of 10 years or 20 years to put a drug out there in the market.
And there's one goal is rather selfish, is that one day I might develop a medication that benefits me, which is
right.
It's always nice. You can look back and go,
Yeah,
I developed that.
Yeah.
The second thing is you develop a medication that helps loads of people in, everywhere. Stands for immuno-oncology Dubai.
Yeah.
And the most basic description of immuno-oncology, I guess, is activating people's own immune systems to fight cancer. I mean, that's at its very most basic. And doing that in a way that's very tailored to an individual person or an individual racial or genetic group's personal makeup, if that makes sense. And that's what we're hoping to develop over the next 5 or 10 years here is immuno-oncology drugs specifically for the region and for the genetic makeup of patients within the region.
Right.
And tailored to the specific kinds of cancers or specific makeup of the tumors that we're commonly seeing in the region.
Also, what kind of tumors are commonly seen in the region?
So most commonly at the moment is probably breast, lung. Those are probably the biggies, which are not uncommon, or colorectal as well here. Colorectal cancer is a big cancer in the region. There's, like any region, a number of other, people get all sorts of cancers, but those are the big three. They're ambitious targets, I would always say.
Yeah.
Lung, colorectal, and breast are always ambitious targets. Certainly breast is very difficult to target. It's a very complicated tumor. Lung, very complicated tumor, excellent at escaping drug treatment. So it might be that our focus, based on our preclinical research and the data we generate, is actually not to target one of those big three, but to target, because the other thing is there's lots of treatment options. A lot of current treatment options for those cancers. It might be that we focus our efforts on something where there's more of an unmet need for treatment, and where these kind of personalized tailored drugs we want to create has a clear advantage by being used in that cancer.
And it's broader than just drug development. It's the ecosystem, the environment around that to support drug development and to support personalized cancer care. And in addition to drug development, there's just generating data in the local population. The pharma companies that are based in Western Europe or North America, the trials generally happen there as well, and it can be important to have local data that's specific to the local genetics, the genetics of the population. So we know how even existing drugs will work in the local population, and potentially how they could be combined with new drugs as well.
So how difficult is it to get this up and running?
It's not easy.
What hurdles do you need to pass? Currently, at what stage are you now?
So we're at the very early stages at the moment, so it's still exploratory, where we're reaching out to governments and institutional investors and kind of starting some early discussions with them in the next few weeks. So very early stages, but like anything, it has to start somewhere.
But it's been heartening.
It's been heartening. The response is really positive.
Yeah.
Like everyone I've spoken to at an institutional investor level privately has been like, this sounds like a great idea for the region. We've got upcoming conversations with some people in the healthcare economy here already.
Right.
We've reached out to the government. We're hoping that we can have a productive conversation with the government here. The hard part really is the amount of funding. And how we then position that funding, like we discussed earlier, in tranches over time, and how we raise funding over time, but also then in how we plug ourselves into the local existing infrastructure,
Right.
develop new infrastructure where needed, and spend the money wisely to achieve that without replicating a research facility or replicating an environment that already exists here.
So you're building from the ground up.
Really, and it has to be, and I think because of what we're trying to do, it has to be ground up.
Yeah, absolutely.
It has to be integrated sensibly within the existing infrastructure, but the development has to be ground up. We're hoping to leapfrog a lot of the early development that took a very long time to develop this technology in Western Europe,
Right.
by using the government's sort of AI healthcare initiatives, by using the existing body of evidence and body of data that we now have for these technologies, to give us a competitive advantage and speed that development cycle up. But there's no easy route to this. You can't just kind of click your fingers and make it appear overnight.
Right.
It's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of communicating with clinicians globally, and a lot of developing or redeveloping the network that we already have from our previous work, and bringing people on board. And I think, as we've touched on, Dubai being this global hub with this kind of very proactive approach, that's actually not hard. It's just time consuming, because there's a lot of expertise required. We're not talking small networks here. We're probably, for a research team point of view, you probably need a minimum of 10, 20 people immediately. Or do we differ on this?
I think they differ on the immediately.
Okay. No. I mean, you need to be bringing in experts. That's you need a preclinical expert, so research experts. They need to bring in a team to support both integrating with the government functions. They need to bring in a team to support direct research on our own. And you need to bring in a team that's also capable of generating, in concert with universities and research institutes that already exist here, internationally peer-reviewed, high-quality publications as soon as possible.
Yeah.
I think without being able to generate publishable data that can be put into really high-quality, well-received publications, we will struggle to get to the next step, which is looking at actually then doing research in humans and running a human trial.
Right.
So, it's not easy.
So let's look at from now to until human trials, how long will it take? 5 years? 4 or 3?
I'd love to be able to say 3. I think that would be a lie.
I think that's optimistic.
Yeah.
That's very
5.
optimistic.
Yeah,
I think
I would say, I think
it's
5
5.
is realistic, yeah.
Yeah. The difference being that you've then got 5 years. So the upside of that is you've got 5 years to develop the infrastructure that's needed here. And
5 years for the infrastructure?
Well, no, 5 years to get to the point you can run a trial in terms of the research.
Yeah.
But in those 5 years in the background, you're also going to be trying to create that trial infrastructure so that when you're ready to use it, it's there. The non-linear thing the linear thing would be to do the research, then start building out the trials, and that's obviously wildly inefficient. Do everything in parallel in preparation for that moment. Where we can save time with doing that is that most drug companies have an established trial process or established trial partners. By creating or working with government to create that infrastructure from fresh, you optimize it at every stage of its development before you start running it. And the other thing, of course, is you've got 5 years to work out where you're going to find the patients and find the number of patients you require, which is really crucial to
Is
fill
this,
those
is
trials.
this done in-house or you have to outsource
So
this?
I would prefer to do it in-house, but it's extremely unusual in industry for companies to do it in-house. They normally work with partners. I think within this region, it's maybe the first opportunity to do it in-house to a degree.
So you can learn a lot from it, right?
Yeah, and we can take the learnings that we obviously have across our careers, where we've run a number of these trials in globally, and there is a very steep learning curve with them compared to other, even oncology trials actually. Compared to any form of other trial, they're very, very different.
Yeah.
And they require very specific environments, staffing, thought processes. And we can apply that knowledge to kind of give us a head start here and to build an environment that's customized to it, which is a major advantage because nearly always you're trying to run a trial that's sort of pushed into a hospital ward. You have to do a lot of work to get those environments appropriate for patients in T-cell receptor trials. It's often things like laboratory equipment needs to be very specialized. The ward environment itself needs to have the right staffing, the right training.
Yeah.
All of these things that are quite difficult when you go and create a global trial network because different places have different standards. If you're doing this up front, doing it locally, it's a perfect opportunity to make the environment absolutely ideal for it from the get-go.
What stage are you now?
What's the journey now? Ooh. Continue getting awareness out there, continue building the relationship with local investors and local government until we can hopefully sign an agreement and obtain funding from that kind of mixed source that we were discussing where the government has ownership, private investors have ownership, and they work in partnership together. And then really, that's when the work begins actually.
Yeah. The reason why I said we won't necessarily need the researchers immediately is because there's the initial sort of setup and discovery phase.
Yeah.
We need to understand everyone's needs and make sure that we're heading in the right direction before the science starts.
Yeah, there's a strategy component to the setup, isn't there? Where we will need physical infrastructure. We will need to look through the existing data very closely, I think. We will have access to the existing data for this region to determine exactly where we should start focusing research efforts.
Yeah.
And that probably is about a year's worth of work.
Yeah.
And in the background, you start doing the things. You start looking at regulatory, you start looking at an academic network, you start building those partnerships out quietly. And it should all then move seamlessly from that strategy piece into a clear direction. And I'm quite a big fan of this idea of not complicating strategy. What is the intent? And finding an intent and moving in a very focused fashion towards that.
That's like, so it's just a lot of groundwork to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think the good news is both of us are very passionate about it.
It is good, yeah, I can see that.
You wouldn't, I don't think anyone would do this if they weren't interested in making it successful.
Yeah,
Like it'd be very hard to persuade someone who wasn't interested in this field to get involved with it.
It ain't easy.
No, and it's a very, very specialized subset within oncology. It's still cutting edge. There's still a lot about TCR technology. There's a lot about TCR we don't know. The actual receptors themselves, the binding, the interaction, all of that is an emerging field. We're learning more about it every day. We're learning still how to optimize the design of those drugs, and that will be an ongoing process probably for the next 10, maybe even 20 years.
Yeah.
You may reach a point where they plateau in terms of the design, is as optimized as it can be, but for now it's still emerging. And the other thing is we're still really understanding how they work in patients.
Yep.
I don't think it would be even reasonable to say that we had a good understanding of how they interact in patients necessarily. We can do it safely. We can generate good outcomes for patients.
Right.
In many cases. They have a clear proven benefit, but we are on the very start of that journey within the technology, and it's got just huge potential still to be understood and tapped into.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that the industry in terms of technology is moving very fast.
Yeah.
So what are the trends currently, and with artificial intelligence, where is it heading? Looks like it could go like 50 years leap ahead.
So in oncology, and there probably is a degree of bias here given what I've done, but I honestly believe that T-cell receptor-targeted therapeutics are going to be a big part of the future. I think they're in their infancy. There's only one approved in the world. I think that combinations of T-cell receptor-targeted therapeutics personalized to a patient, possibly in combination with other drugs like checkpoint inhibitors. I think that's the future of cancer care. And I think that's reflected in the industry. There's a huge amount of interest in TCR targeted therapeutics now, and people are starting to look at multivalent molecules where you target more than one cancer target with a single drug. Another way of doing it would be using more than one monovalent drug, which might be more useful if you're looking at personalized medicine. But I have a firm belief in TCR targeted therapeutics personally. Not too long ago, the big hope in oncology was targeted therapies. So by that I mean not drugs that harness the immune system, drugs that block kind of metabolic pathways in tumours, and they are effective to a degree. But that type of medicine, there's almost always an escape mechanism for cancer. Cancer's like evolution speeded up. You challenge it with something, and it will mutate, and it will escape from that. So targeted therapies, they're still developed, they're effective, but they may be part of ultimately the personalised medicine, but they're probably not going to be anywhere near the sort of the golden bullet on their own. So my belief, and the reason we're doing this, my belief is that immunotherapy as a whole, and a big part of that, TCR targeted therapies are going to be the future. In biotech as a whole, there's huge amounts of innovation. You name it, people are developing it.
And I think the other thing is it has a horizon beyond just oncology.
Yeah.
TCR therapeutics, because of the fact that you're in effect modulating the immune system, and you can trick, if you will, the immune system into doing things or not doing things with these drugs that you do or don't want them to do. So obviously our interest is oncology, and our focus is on tricking the immune system into fighting cancer. But actually where people have autoimmune diseases, so where they have inappropriate activation of their immune system, where their body attacks itself.
Right.
So the common example is always lupus.
Lupus, I remember lupus.
The ability to down-regulate the immune system using these drugs by changing slightly the way they function, to instead of having an on signal for the immune system, to having an off signal for the immune system, but in a very targeted manner. So you maintain a person's immune function, but turn it off where it's not appropriate. That's
by turn it off. Do you mean like taking a drug or something?
So that we'd give this whole class of therapies can be used outside cancer. So you can use them to do where we're using them in cancer to turn on the immune system. Where people have got autoimmune disease, you can give another version of the same drug conceptually that instead of turning on the immune system, turns it off, but in a very targeted manner. So you leave the majority of the system.
So it's like a regulator.
But where the system's not functioning correctly, you improve the regulation of it. It's a good way of putting it, so they're versatile. They have the ability to target multiple different cancers. They have I would say, relatively friendly safety profile from a development point of view in clinic. They are, because of their targeted nature, they're inherently slightly less toxic than most cancer drugs to the rest of the body. And we design them very specifically to not house activity off the target that we want them to attack. They're just fascinating. And as Howard says, since they've become, I guess, part of the consciousness of oncology therapy, we've had so many fantastic interactions with clinicians where they've got great anecdotal evidence of using them. They're very positive about them on the whole. They're very positive about getting involved in trials to develop them further. They have great support from patient advocacy groups too. Fantastic support from patient advocacy, because people, now that there is one on the market, people can see the benefits of them. And even before they came to the market, patient advocacy groups are fighting, pushing, wanting these drugs to be developed for a greater array of cancers than they currently are. That's, really all the reason you kind of need at that point is, patients coming to you going, please make these drugs, please develop these therapies for us, is why we're doing what we're doing.
So, do you think it will be possible to be able to predict what kind of cancer a person will have in the future? Is this possible?
It already is in some cases, because you can be born with certain mutations. For cancer to develop, you have sort of a cascade of mutations, and in some people, the cancer, that first mutation happens because of sunlight exposure or smoking or whatever it might be, something environmental. But some people are born with with a mutation that will predispose that cascade happening. So yeah, there's already BRCA mutations for breast cancer and other cancers. People are sometimes screened for that if there's a known history of breast cancer. If you look back on a family tree and mum, grandma, auntie all had breast cancer, there's probably a mutation there somewhere. So that already happens to a degree, and that kind of screening is almost certainly going to develop and become more widespread. The difficulty with that is, and it's like any sort of screening, that for a screening program to be successful, you have to have something you can detect, a test, and then you have to have something you can do.
Right.
And it's the second bit that's often difficult. If you do find out that someone is predisposed to developing a certain cancer, what do you do?
Well, maybe
Sometimes
probably
it's
lung cancer, you stop smoking.
I mean,
the
doom can be as simple as keeping them under surveillance.
Yeah.
In some cases,
Right.
In the hope that if they then go on to develop a cancer, you catch it very early and can remove it before it's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But that doesn't then necessarily mean they shouldn't still be under surveillance after that point.
Mm-hmm.
The most effective screening programs have a doom which involves either a curative treatment or preventative treatment. And that's why you see, sadly, some families, like using the breast cancer example, women opting to have elective mastectomy, so elective removal of breast tissue, to lower their risk of
cancer,
developing a breast cancer because they have such a strong family history. And obviously there's a number of very strong advocates within the global healthcare community in regards to some of these screening initiatives, who are doing a lot to raise awareness for these programs. And they're undoubtedly effective. Where you institute public health funded screening programs, they are very cost effective. They save a lot of lives. They are far, far cheaper and far, far better for patients than waiting until the problem is already occurred.
Yeah.
The problem is always is uptake of those screening programs, making them easy to engage with the patients, and having the resources once you've got them at scale to manage the potential patient burden that occurs as a result of them. And there's no point having a screening program if you don't have one hospital that is the only hospital that can provide treatments. You need a network of hospitals that can manage the outcome from that screening program. And that's a challenge in any healthcare economy anywhere in the world.
Yeah. So if you look at cancer treatment currently, it's more on the upside. Like in some countries, if you have cancer, you're probably going to be financially ruined. How are you going to tackle the aspect of affordability?
So the insurance sector within the UAE, fortunately, is very comprehensive.
Okay.
It's a very well developed insurance system. There is very good public funding for access to healthcare for citizens within the region. So that's actually probably less of a concern than it would be, say, in some Western countries where actually getting nationalized healthcare systems to fund cutting-edge drugs can be quite challenging because of the cost of the drug. These are not cheap products. Here, I think, given all the efforts we're going to try and make to commercialize the system throughout its life cycle and throughout its development, that will offset some of those costs, hopefully. But yeah, I mean, you do have to work with insurers, you have to work with government to get these things funded. I think the difference here is that because it's so targeted at a region that up until now has had very limited investment in them by traditional pharmaceutical complex, if you will, there's a good chance that the funding will be made available to ensure that people here have access to the latest technology. At least we're hoping so. I think there's a good chance that there's a compelling argument to be made for it from a public health and health benefit point of view.
Yeah.
But no, they're not cheap, unfortunately. Cancer therapy in general, like traditional cancer therapy is actually not very expensive though.
Which one is traditional?
So chemotherapy, radiotherapy, on the whole, are relatively cheap therapies to administer. They have a high cost burden in terms of patient side effects, patients being stuck in hospital, feeling sick.
Yeah.
The actual drugs themselves are not expensive. The immuno-oncology agents are, by their definition, expensive. As we discussed, 20 years to develop the platform,
Right.
or the technology, or the understanding required to make a safe and effective drug. That costs a lot of money. Hopefully, by utilizing things like artificial intelligence, you bring that production cost down, and it's purely man hours actually. That it's having the computer take out some of the legwork in target acquisition, and going touching on what we discussed earlier, this idea of where does AI sit within this healthcare? Does it create a quantum leap? No, I don't think it does. I think what it does do is help human researchers get to an answer quicker. You still have to go away and validate everything. You still have to construct.
Yeah, I could be wrong.
research.
Hallucinations.
Yeah, applying rigorous scientific process means you always are going to have to test whatever the computer says. That's still going to take time, cost money, use resources. It just reduces the number of dead ends that you go down to reach that end point. And we're already seeing that in the industry. You have drug targets which have been AI verified getting into trial within a year, 2 years of discovery rather than 3, 4, 5 years. You have large projects underway globally looking to utilize AI to find novel uses for existing drugs,
Right.
find novel active compounds to develop drugs from that we perhaps haven't found in nature before. So it's all a supportive effort, and it does make it does have the potential to have a huge impact, but it doesn't replace humans actually doing
What is it called? Yeah.
You're just going to put the hours in.
And fundamentally, IODXP, we hope will be a public-private collaboration. So the ultimate drug cost should be mitigated, as James says, with that kind of the setup of the clinical trial and the drug development environment. Ultimately for the benefit of people in the region who wouldn't have access to this type of drugs. And as we discussed, the kind of Western centricity of the pharmaceutical industry in Europe, North America, where really there's separation of public and private with the pharma companies on one side and governments and payer organisations on the other. That is quite a tricky environment, depending on the country. In the US less so, although there's more and more focus on drug cost in the US. But where you have the interface of public and private, for example, in the UK or pretty much any European country,
Right.
and drug price becomes a big, quite a contentious issue. But hopefully, with the kind of integrated structure that we're looking at here, it should be less so.
And the more drugs of this nature you make, and the more applicable they become to treating people, the lower the cost. Ultimately, if you can make drugs that treat a large number of people, it's always going to, the unit cost after your development is always lower. So the more we can get them approved, the more appetite there is for investing in their development, the more efficient we become at developing them, the better you get at manufacturing them. Because manufacturing is a significant cost. It's very specialized manufacture. The more you can bring that price down. So that's, unfortunately, that will take time, and it does rely on continued expenditure. You can't bring it down magically. I don't know if there's anything that I can think of that would magically half the cost of developing a cutting-edge therapy overnight. Yeah, AI is great. Yeah, existing knowledge is useful. Creating a proactive environment really helps. Effective regulation really helps. It's still expensive. But until we've got more of them on the market and we've broadened the impact of them, that won't start to change.
So, usually, how long does the IP of a drug last? stays exclusive? Let's say you develop a drug.
It depends where you are in the world. So initial patents are around 10, 12 years, depending where you are. And that's from the point that the patent is filed. So you may not even be in clinical trials at that point, but obviously companies try to keep things confidential until they have to file the patent. You'll file the patent, and then the clock's ticking. So
once you file the patent, the clock's ticking.
The clock's ticking, yeah. But, and this is almost an industry in itself in the US, the kind of drug patent law, more so than Europe, but it's obviously a big thing in Europe as well. When you file multiple patents on your molecule to start with, to protect it, then when you get into clinical development and approval, you can extend, it's not always the patent specifically, but you can extend the intellectual property life. First of all, by getting an approval, you get data exclusivity. So even though the patent on your molecule and your physical molecule might be expiring, other people can't use your developmental data.
Your data, right.
And you can get further extensions on data exclusivity through getting it approved in different indications. There are incentives to develop for orphan indications or develop for different populations, where you can keep extending your patent incrementally. It doesn't double it or anything, but you can get incremental extensions. And obviously that's a massive part of industry, because the clock starts ticking when you get your first intellectual property. Then you've got to finish preclinical development, clinically develop. Then when you get a marketing authorization, you can start making money. And that window where you
have to recoup your investment.
Your investment is so important. And it's what makes the industry financially viable, and what means that innovation will continue.
Right.
It affects your public signaling too during that development process. Because of course, if you don't publicize what you're doing, you won't manage to create a trial network to support the development. So there's a degree to which, certainly in industry, we spend a lot of time working out what can sensibly be shared with clinicians and researchers to help them understand what we're doing, to generate support for the drug, to generate the ability to trial it, and what we shouldn't be releasing now, or shouldn't be releasing until the point it's received market authorization, to protect the intellectual property of what we're doing. And that's actually in and of itself a huge challenge, as you were alluding to, is this, your clock's ticking, but you have to release something. You've got to drip feed information to the market in order for it to react favorably.
Like creating awareness, sort of?
It's creating awareness, creating the ability to bring clinicians on board to want to do the trials, and then things, the one issue, for example, then using commercial partners to develop drug combinations. So using more than one drug, but the one other drug is commercially available.
Oh, is this possible?
Yeah. So we do a lot of drug trials in IO focused on combination therapy. But that in and of itself becomes very difficult, because then you have competing commercial interests. So it's a difficult subject. Yes, it's important that patents probably do have a limitation to them, because limiting the patent stimulates further development. There's a commercial pressure to do something new and to continue researching. At the same time, there does, in fairness, need to be an ability to return money to investors. There needs to be an ability for companies to profit reasonably and sensibly from their hard work.
Right.
And actually things like, for example, market access in different countries having different laws takes a very long time to overcome. So I would always advocate probably for a refreshment of the patent system for drugs. Not a wholesale change, but an update to allow companies a little more protection for the work that they've done before it becomes available as a generic medication.
Right.
I wouldn't pretend to know enough to know exactly what format that change should take. But I think given how much time it preoccupies commercially, it takes a lot of time. A lot of people spend a lot of time thinking about this inside a company. It probably should be simplified in some way, to some extent, in that company's favor.
So let's talk about your experiences, previous work, and breakthroughs and everything, and how it led you here in the first place.
Oh, sorry, well, mine's shorter than yours, so I'll whiz through like completely. I trained in the UK and did medicine as a graduate. So I had an undergraduate degree in biomedical sciences and then went into medicine when I was a little bit older. Worked in the NHS for a number of years and I had a kind of crunch point. I either stayed in the NHS and went through training and came out as a consultant in something, or I did something that was a bit more commercially focused. And at the time, the NHS was undergoing a number of changes, so I made the decision to leave to focus on a more commercial role. Went and worked for a clinical research organization that did or ran and developed trials for a number of commercial pharmaceutical and biotechnology companies. So similar to your background, ultimately, in the benefit for clinicians leaving and coming into industry there is that you get exposed to a vast array of different molecules, drug classes, research fields. Different pharmaceutical companies like to do things different ways, so you learn quite intimately how they like to run their drug development processes as you support them to do that. You gain a significant amount of exposure working with regulators to gain approval for these trials. Most of my background was first in human trials, so it's the first time you've ever given the drug to a human being. And that's a particular regulatory challenge or hurdle, which you gain a lot of experience in very rapidly. And then moving through that process from a training point of view, you spend a lot of time reviewing the collated data, reporting the collated data and assessing it for safety, and generating reports that can then be sent back to both the pharmaceutical company sponsoring the trial and later on to the regulators to achieve things like a marketing approval. So I did that for a number of years and then I moved into the oncology space, which is where I met Howard, and where we worked together for just under 2 years.
2 years? Yeah,
a couple of years before moving to Dubai to.
So how long have you been in oncology space?
Oncology space specifically for 2 years now. And then previous to that, I'd done a number of oncology trials within the clinical research organization, which is where my kind of interest got sparked.
Right.
Obviously at medical school and in hospitals, I dealt with cancer a lot, seen a lot of patients, through my training. But being exposed to kind of cancer trials in sort of first in human cancer trials and later in phase 3 trials, which is trials in actual patients who have cancer, was where my kind of interest started and why I made the decision when I left clinical research commercially. I wanted to go into a biotech and really focus on it further. And I've been lucky enough to help develop a number of trials now in that field and actually kick them off and review the initial data coming out of them, develop the global network of clinicians trialing them and work with those clinicians as well, because that's a really big part of some of the early phase oncology is working with clinicians who are now using these drugs in trials, seeing firsthand their experiences, discussing exactly what they're seeing is a very, very important part of where you're then going to take that trial and what you're going to develop from it. So yeah, that's my background.
Well,
You go
pretty extensive.
His is way more expensive.
My background's similar, but I'm just older.
Like you said.
So I'm a UK trained physician. I graduated from Edinburgh in 2005. I also did a pharmacology degree while at medical school, and that was always with an eye on the pharmaceutical industry. It was something that had always interested me. I wanted to keep that door open if possible, and did a few years training in the NHS. Kind of started just at very early. Started training in general surgery, but then the industry was just too appealing then. The NHS is a wonderful thing in principle, but often a difficult place to work. So then I moved into a CRO, so a contract research organisation like James, doing phase 1 clinical trials in lots of different therapy areas, some oncology, and it's a great place to start your career in industry. You learn so much science, so much clinical pharmacology. You learn a lot about the industry as well. You see, but from one step removed, you see the way the industry moves. I did that for about 2.5, 3 years. Then I moved into an actual pharmaceutical company, quite a big company, and started off as a lowly medical advisor, but then sort of stepped up the ladder and set up the oncology business unit in the UK for a big company that was just starting to build its presence in oncology, and launched then a drug called enzalutamide for prostate cancer that was really revolutionary. Won quite a lot of awards for innovation and for kind of for technical innovation as well. We did bench to bedside in 7 years, so it was launched really quickly. It was a really efficient development program there, and that was a huge drug, and still is really important in prostate cancer treatment. And that was a UK level role. Then I moved to become a European medical director for a small pharma / biotech. It was a bit of both, but worked in blood cancers then, looking after some established products and some new products, and working on early access programs, so delivering medicines to patients that aren't actually approved, but where they're needed, that there are routes to do that. I did that for a few years, and then moved to the company where James and I met. Moved there predominantly because of the technology, the T-cell receptor technology.
The T-cells technology.
Yeah, and before I went there, I looked at it and I thought, this makes a lot of sense, and this is really cool. And the reason why T-cell receptors weren't a thing really until the last few years is because it took more than 20 years to develop the first TCR targeted medicine, the one that we worked on.
Wow.
There was just developing T-cell receptors is hard. It's complex. It's not like making antibodies. It's very complex. It's a whole new
hostile
world.
environment to put drugs into the human body.
Yeah.
The human body doesn't like having things put into it. It doesn't want them there inherently. So actually taking receptors from the surface of human tissue, making them soluble in blood, making them have therapeutic benefit, then getting them out of the body safely, it is, for any drug, not just in oncology, it is a huge challenge. Like, your body is not designed to have stuff put into it. It doesn't want that, and it is very, very good at being hostile
So new bodies.
to anything.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, actually, same for me. Actually, when I was looking around to leave the CRO space, looked at a number of oncology companies, both large and small. Realized I really didn't want to work in a very big company. That wasn't going to be for me. I liked working with a smaller team to do more focused work. And came across this company doing TCR, and it is just exciting. So you'd go to work every day and you'd be seeing new data. No one's ever seen it before,
And
you're the first person to get eyes on it.
leaves you wow.
Yeah, and then there is a wow factor because I remember the first time we started seeing.
Well, sometimes it's wow, and sometimes it's oh.
Yeah, it's very unexpected. It could be a good O or a bad O.
Okay.
You suddenly see these responses to the drug or imaging, or responses to the drug in terms of what patients reporting, and you go, oh, that's really clinically significant.
Yeah.
And you're the first kind of group of people ever to have come across this data. That's, okay, it obviously exists in all walks of industry.
Yeah.
But the human benefit there is really palpable, and it's very satisfying as a clinician to be able to achieve that for your patients. And I don't know about you, but I certainly feel leaving hospital medicine has not impacted my ability to help patients. If anything, it's enhanced it, because I can try and help a larger number of people more fundamentally. As a hospital doctor, it's like a one-on-one interaction. You have one chance at a time to make an impact on someone's life. The great thing about pharmaceutical careers is that you have the potential to make a kind of global impact on human knowledge that leads to better human health.
It's like you go to bed every night, you're like, well, I did that. I'm proud of that.
Yeah, no, I can genuinely be proud of it.
And that was in the company we worked for, where we worked on developing the world's first TCR targeted therapy. That was the pinnacle of that. Previous jobs were cool, but
the novelness
doing that, the novelness,
seeing it actually go into patients commercially that's a big moment for any drug company with any drug going to market. But to do it for the first time with a completely new class of drug, and then,
an indication with no
as I say, a very unmet need being met for the first time, and then actually to take that forward to the next generation and start the trials doing the same thing but with a wider variety of cancers. It's a very special thing, actually.
It is, yeah.
And don't get us wrong, we're not like this. We're not solely responsible for this. It's a huge team of people, both clinically, pre-clinically. It's thousands of people dedicating their lives to doing this, who all hopefully rightfully sharing that achievement. But it's a great feeling.
Yeah, it's a great feeling.
You go to bed feeling pretty satisfied. Follow normal stress of work. It's a pretty satisfying job.
And the good part is sometimes you go to a different place, and you hear about somebody talking about this drug, and you're like, oh, and you don't even say a word. You're like, oh, okay.
Yeah. I think I always look forward to that as a goal in retirement. And there's one goal is rather selfish, is that one day I might develop a medication that benefits me, which is
right.
It's always nice. You can look back and go, I thought I developed that.
Yeah.
The second thing is you develop a medication that helps loads of people in everywhere. And you can look at people around you and go, I might have contributed to doing something that saved your life.
So that saved your life.
That'd be amazing. And the third facet, and it's probably less talked about, is this idea of contributing to the overall gamut of human knowledge.
Right.
Like, and the older I get, the more important that becomes to me. This idea that you're leaving behind something at the end of hopefully what is a long and productive life, something palpably useful to humankind, something that other people can build on and take forward and do even greater things with, that you've materially contributed to. And actually the pharmaceutical industry is a great way to do that.
Yeah.
You think about where we were with healthcare in 100 years ago, and you think where we are now, and all of that is a direct response to people working to leave behind that knowledge to be built upon. And I think that's the hope of most people.
Yeah.
Or one of the hopes of most people in the industry is to do something really great.
Yeah. And there's something behind.
It's a big machine, as you say. It's rare that one person's responsible for any one thing, but being part of that big machine when it's moving things on is pretty cool.
And it's I think the other thing is that you go to a lot of conferences, about industry events. We were talking about this idea of drip feeding knowledge into the industry to support development and to get people excited about development and talking about how they can use these drugs. There are other oncology initiatives here. There are companies out there in the UAE actively doing work to improve cancer care for citizens and people within the region. I think our hope is to bring the bleeding edge of cancer care to this region in a manner that I don't feel has been done before, specifically within the field of TCR immuno-oncology products, which we know isn't being done in the region, and to contribute to that growing base of knowledge here. And hopefully the more people see this region as a center for doing that, the more people will come, the more research will get done locally.
So you think this is going to be a trend as time goes on?
I hope. As I said earlier, I believe it should be a trend. I believe it must be a trend, and therefore it will be a trend. Which is perhaps big words, but
so you're a first mover.
Well, yeah, hopefully. When you look at the environment that's been created here for people to do business in, it's very logical that should be the case. It's the most proactive, supportive business environment possibly in the developed world. There's not many environments where you can come to somewhere, start doing something,
hit the ground running
the ground running in the way that you can in Dubai. or within the UAE as a whole. So I hope that prediction comes true. I really, really do.
I hope too.
I really hope I won't like have to look downcast and feel humiliated in 20 years' time when I look back on this, having said this, because I don't believe that would be the case.
Well, you have more industry insight, so I believe you too. So
Good news, we've persuaded someone. Our work here is done. No, I mean, getting the message out there at the moment is what counts, and everything else hopefully follows it.
So to recap, our immuno-oncology Dubai is on the cutting edge of biotechnology and hopes to revolutionize our cancer treatment and cancer care and more modern, more personalized way of treating cancer. And the fact is that Dubai is a hub for many things, for travel, for tourism, for infrastructure. And I believe that Dubai, yes, can be a biotech hub as well, as you believe. So it's nice to have you guys on the podcast, and looking forward to doing more podcasts as we move forward with the industry. I like the passion and looking forward to all of this in the future.
Thank you.
I really appreciate that.